Hello, my name is Keith, and these are my stamps. Episode 17 Argentina. Argentina is in the south of South America. It's the eighth largest country in the world at 2,780,000 square kilometers, about 1,073,000 square miles. Also, it has a claim on some territory in Antarctica. Meaning of Argentina is silvery from the Latin argentum, possibly linked to the legend or the myth of a silver mountain in the interior of the continent when the Spanish arrived. Argentina is bordered by Chile, Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil, Uruguay, and the Atlantic Ocean. The Andes Mountains run along pretty much all of the border with Chile. The highest peak is Aconcagua, nearly 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet. The majority of the rest of the country is pampas, low grassland, basically from the mountains to the coast. In the south, there are glaciers, and there is a wide range of temperatures, climate zones from subtropical in the north down to polar in the south. The capital is Buenos Aires, which is on the coast opposite Uruguay. Language spoken is Spanish, and the population is nearly 47 million, which is a little less than Spain. The history of Argentina. Before the arrival of the Europeans in the early 1500s, the area had about 20 ethnic groups thinly dispersed across it. In 1536, Pedro de Mendoza founded Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires, but it was not a success. And so in 1580, the city was refounded, this time by Juan de Garay. There were various waves of Spanish conquistadors coming from different areas of the continent and founding different cities across present-day Argentina. Until 1776, Argentina was part of the Viceroyalty of Peru, until King Charles III, or Carlos, I imagine, created the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, Buenos Aires becoming a large port in these times. There were British attacks in 1806 and 1807, and although these attacks were repelled, it showed that Spain was weak. And with Napoleon's occupation of Spain, the local Argentines formed a governing body led by Cornelio Saavedra in 1810. For the next 10 years, there was instability, various governments and leaders vying with each other for power. Three stand out: San Martin, Belgrano, and Güemes. San Martin had actually fought for Spain in various wars until as late as 1801 in the War of the Oranges. But he returned to Argentina and, with Belgrano, Güemes, and others, led the liberation of Argentina, Chile, and eventually Peru. However, shortly after the successes in Lima, San Martin suddenly left and returned to Europe, living for the rest of his life in France, Belgium, and Britain, before returning to France, where he died. In 1816, Congress, so this is the newly formed Argentinian Congress, proclaimed independence. A civil war followed, and the two sides of the civil war were, one side those advocating central power in Buenos Aires, and the other side were those who wanted more autonomy for the provinces. In 1826, the first president was inaugurated, Bernardino Rivadavia. The civil war, however, continued until 1880. When it finally finished, there were waves of European immigration, especially Italians. There were revolutions in 1893, 1905. There were coups in 1930, 1943, 1955, 1962, 1966, 1976. So pretty unsettled and not a very stable political situation. One of the most famous presidents, perhaps, is Juan Perón with his first wife, Evita. They have a very divisive legacy. Um, One of the things that was allowed during his first two reigns was the allowing of Argentina to become a haven for Nazi war criminals at the end of the Second World War. In 1976, Juan Perón had died in his third term in office, and his third wife, Isabel, had taken over as president. However, she was removed in the final coup, the 1976 coup, which installed a military junta, which oversaw the persecution, disappearance, and murder of thousands. It oversaw the defeat of the Argentine army to the British in the Falklands, corruption, bankruptcy, and an increase of foreign debt by more than 5 times. This was finally ended in 1983, since when there has been democratically elected presidents. The stamp issuing history. Provincial stamps were issued in 1856. National releases began in 1858 and have continued to present. There have been quite a few changes to Argentina's currency. Mostly it's been the peso in different forms, with a period of the Austral there from 1985 to 1991. The changes have mostly been due to rapid hyperinflation, and so a devaluation has taken place, which I've tried to explain there on the right-hand column. So as an example, the fourth Argentinian peso came into being because of hyperinflation, and 4 zeros were cut from the previous peso, which meant that 10,000 pesos became 1 peso kind of overnight, which didn't really encourage people to save. These are my stamps. The earliest I have from Argentina is this one from 1862. There are two varieties, depending on whether there is an accent over the U of República. And that is going to be quite a theme, actually. There are some varieties. Pretty much every stamp or every series or whatever has lots of variations. There are also lots of different series of leaders, or portraits of leaders. These two are both from 1868. On the left, we have the first president, Bernardino Rivadavia. There are two varieties, whether the background is a kind of crossed shading or a lined shading. This one is the crossed one. On the right, Manuel Belgrano, one of those three military heroes that I mentioned earlier. This one is a cutout from an imprint, and I can't really find very much information. If anyone out there knows more about this, then please let me know. I think it's a picture of Carlos de Alvear, who was yet another military leader. There, I can't find an actual stamp. Often with a cutout or an imprint, there is an actual stamp that corresponds. I couldn't find one with this particular picture or portrait on it. I did the online search, the Google image search, and found a couple of full covers with this imprint on. One from 1888 and one from 1891. Neither had a lot of information. They basically just said old Argentinian cover for 1 centavo, which I kind of knew myself. I think, looking carefully at the postmark here, I think this one is from 1893, but that's pretty much all I can find out about that one. Here are two more varieties of a stamp. On the left from 1882 and the right 1884. This relatively easy to see the difference. The printing is different, but there are some varieties where it's not quite as obvious and you have to count the white dots. You'll notice the stamp on the left has 19 horizontally going across and the one on the right has 33. This set is from the centenary of the deposition of the Spanish viceroyalty in 1810. So this is when the locals decided enough was enough. They wanted the country for themselves. This then is from 1910, and the right-hand picture, the stamp, is the 5 cents. That's Cornelio Saavedra, who was the first leader of that first government of Argentina. 1916 now, and again another centenary. This is the Declaration of Independence. These three, they commemorate the revolution or coup, depending, I suppose, on your point of view, from September of 1930, and these were released in 1930. And that particular coup signaled what later became known as the infamous decade. With Argentina stamps, you really have to be careful when you're sorting through. It's very easy to, with a cursory glance, just think, oh yeah, they're all the same. Here's an example of 3 stamps that superficially you could very easily confuse. They are all different. On the left, it's from 1936. It's a map of South America with the country borders. In the center, from 1937, same map, but this time there's only a border for Argentina. The other countries do not have the borders. And the third one on the right is from 1951. Again, it shows the map of South America just with the borders for Argentina. However, now it's including Argentina's Antarctic territorial claim. But all same colors, same value, easy to confuse if you're sorting quite a few stamps. And on that theme, here are some others which are quite easy to get muddled up. The top left, the sunflowers, obvious difference, of course, is the color. This one was a change from the devaluation in 1970. So the brownish one is 1 peso, and the 1 cent is the green one from 1972 after the revaluation. But there are different varieties of both of those colors. At the bottom, we have portrait of Sarmiento. And again, there are varieties of that. This one is easy to see. This is one of the reasons why I kind of like sorting Argentinian stamps. I do like finding different variations of the same stamp. However, I am not very good at finding, as I've said before, finding watermarks, paper types, and all of those kinds of things. However, with this, the different printing type is very easy to see. The lithograph on the left and the photogravure on the right, they were 2 years apart, 1964 and 1962 respectively. Again, easy to spot, but not if you're going through quickly. And the final group on here, all of these airmail stamps with the stylized plane. The first difference is whether they are inscribed Argentina or República Argentina. So the top 3, the one on the left, just Argentina, the other 2 have the Republic name. The 11 pesos on the left is from 1963, the 68 pesos from 1970, the 70 cents from 1973, and then the 2 at the bottom are surcharged and overprinted, revalued, and they're both from 1975. Talking of overprints, there are loads of them. Here are just a few examples. Different government offices used different overprint. Um, and if you just have a look, for instance, at the 10 cents red on the right, there are 5 examples there with different overprints. If you're interested in looking for varieties, that 10 cents of Rivadavia has, according to Colnect, at least 52 different varieties, not including overprints. If you include overprints, there are over 100 varieties of that one stamp. So there's plenty to get your teeth into if you are interested in Argentinian stamps. Sorry, if you are interested in sorting out different varieties. There are also just plain official service overprints, not the particular department that was being used. And of course, these come in different varieties. There are different fonts that were used. There was the kind of on the side vertical, you can see at the top left. There was the overprint in 2 lines. You can see on the right, you can see at the bottom in 1 line, and bottom in 1 line with just the S as an abbreviation for servicio. And the other thing to notice here, there are 3 stamps, all of San Martin, the red ones, which again come in all kinds of different varieties, different currencies, or different times of the peso, the reevaluation, and so on. Yet more variations come along with Perfins, although strictly speaking, the one at the top left is not a perfin, it is a puncture. I had not heard of this difference, but this was used on a block of stamps to cancel it rather than the perfin, which is used to restrict the use of that stamp for a particular organization. So the top left was used between 1900 and 1931 to pay for bulk mailing of newspapers, and the whole block of stamps was put on as a payment, as I say, and they were punctured with the word inutilizado, meaning to render disabled. So they weren't used after they had been perforated. That was to show, that was a bit like a cancellation stamp, which is why it's not an actual perfin. The other 3, however, are perfins. The top right, the 3 cents stamp from 1949, was perfined by Parker Davis and Company, which is now a subsidiary of Pfizer, but at the time was the US's largest and oldest drug maker, and they had operations in Argentina. The bottom left, the 5-cent stamp from 1935, the perfin is Kimona, which I couldn't find a lot of information about, seems to have been a printer. In the bottom right, on the 20-cent stamp from 1947, the Manufactura Algodonera Argentina. They are fabric makers. Algodon is cotton. So there are 4 examples, or 3 examples of perfins and 1 of puncture. So again, more variations. Back to the chronological view through the stamps. This is now 1950, and it's the death centenary of San Martin. You'll recall one of the heroes of liberation. There's a couple of different portraits of him, and then the 25-cent stamp at the bottom, looking rather dramatic on the cliff there, is at Boulogne in France, which is the place where he died. This 1952 set of Eva Perón, the centavos values, which are all of the top line and the first 2 on the second line, are all inscribed Eva Perón, but the middle-sized ones, the 1 peso and 2 peso, you can see are not. And you can see that because there is a later version from the same year with that style of stamp with Eva Perón's name on. The second 1 peso stamp, the bottom right, has her name in the bottom right corner just above Argentina, where it doesn't have it on the first time it was issued. So again, you've got to keep your eyes open when you're sorting through a whole load of stamps. The 5 pesos did originally have the name on, just like the centavos ones. This 1964 stamp, 18 pesos, shows the Falkland Islands. The Falkland Islands, known in Argentina as the Islas Malvinas, is the site of an ongoing dispute between Argentina and Britain about sovereignty, which led to a brief undeclared war in 1982. This, not a stamp, it's a label from 1965 commemorating the centenary of the arrival of around about 150 Welsh immigrants to Patagonia to found the town of Madryn. They sailed on the clipper Mimosa, which is shown there on the label, arriving in 1865. And in the top right of this label, in Welsh, it says Colony of Patagonia. This 1973 cancelled envelope with a 1968 stamp on it commemorates the 1970 first landing of a plane in Antarctica. There's all a bit of a mess there, but the stamp shows Argentina's Antarctic territory, which is why I guess that was chosen, although it was from a couple of years before. However, there had been a devaluation in the currency, so that stamp wasn't enough anymore, and on the back of that cover, 2 1-cent stamps, the sunflower that we saw earlier, have been added. This, by the way, is a different version of the sunflower stamp from the previous green one we saw. Another cover, this one from 1974, the creation of the State Post and Telecommunications Company, Encotel. The petrol base, petrol as in the seabird, not the fuel, is an Argentine scientific station in Antarctica, and it was closed due to a fire in the winter of 74, which for the Southern Hemisphere would have been July and August, and reopened early the following year. So around about the time that this was sent, February of 75. I mentioned the Falklands War earlier. This is a cover sent to an Argentine combatant during that war. The war lasted from April to June of 1982, and this was sent in May. And it's addressed to Puerto Malvinas, which was the Argentine name for Port Stanley in the Falklands. It has stamps on the front and the back of the cover because it's needed 7 2,000 peso stamps, one 1,000 peso stamp, and one 200 peso stamp, making a total of 15,200 pesos. I did check the Argentine Veterans website, and Sergeant Hugo Montenegro did survive the Falklands War. Next 3 slides, I think, are all looking at this flower stamp because it's a very good example to show the different values and devaluation of the currency. So these ones were the first issue in 1982, and they are in the third Argentine peso. You can see that the denominations range from 200 pesos in the top left down to 30,000 in the bottom right, which gives you a kind of good example of the inflation that was happening at the time. And the two particularly to note, the second one from the left at the top, the 300 pesos Morning Glory, the purple flower, and the fourth from the left at the top, the 500 peso, the silk tree flower, that kind of pinky one with 5 splayed out petals looking a bit like a starfish. So I'll be talking about those in a moment. Now, in fact, because this was the second issue the following year, 1983, 4 zeros have been cut off, and the fourth Argentine peso has been launched. The silk tree flower here is the first stamp with the lowest denomination of 5 cents. Previously, it was 500 pesos. 4 zeros chopped off, it's now 5 cents. The Morning Glory was 300 pesos, which would have been reduced to 3 cents, but they didn't issue a stamp of 3 cents, so the picture was reused, and there the Morning Glory is again, it's at the bottom row, and it's now 20 pesos. And you can see that these are ranging from 5 cents all the way through to 50 pesos. Again, quite a wide range. And again, you can see for the variations that you have to be pretty careful when you're sorting. How many times am I going to say that? The next set, that devaluation didn't fix the problem. So 2 years later, in 1985, another devaluation. This time the currency had a new name, Australs, and 2 zeros were cut off. And you can see the Morning Glory is back up to the top of the pile. It's now 2 cents. It was 20 pesos before. It's had 2 of its zeros chopped off, and it's now 2 cents. I couldn't find out a reason why the 8.5 cent stamp in the top right is small and all the others are not. As far as I can see, every other stamp is that same size, but that one isn't. Maybe it was for special use on a postcard or something. I do not know. If you do, please let me know. So now from 1995 to 1997, with a bit more of a stable currency, we have this cheerful fauna series. There are still variations. If you look at the color for República Argentina, you'll see on the 10 cents, it's a kind of different color and almost intensity than the other ones. And there are some more obvious variations, which I'm guessing they must have done on purpose. For instance, the 25 cents penguin stamp in the middle at the top. There are some versions with his head poking out of the circle, like this one, others where his head is completely inside the circle. There's some with the toucan's beak almost touching the edge of the stamp. There are some like this one with it only just coming out of the circle. There are some with the owl where his head is much larger and poking out. Then there are some smaller, and so on, and so on, and so on. Finally, my most recent stamp from Argentina is this one from 2007. It's a souvenir sheet of a meteorite from an area called Campo del Cielo, which is a crater field in northern Argentina, getting up towards the border with Paraguay. The crater field covers 18 by 3 kilometers, about 11 by 2 miles, containing at least 26 craters. And the actual stamp is in 3D, and you need 3D glasses to see it properly, which are included in the fold-out pack. And the souvenir sheet has the meteorite blasting through the atmosphere on its way to smack into northern Argentina. So, these are some of my stamps from Argentina. I'm Keith. Goodbye.